Good afternoon, everybody. This is Jake Wynn, Director of Interpretation at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine in Frederick, Maryland. Coming at you for another of our live programs here online at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine's Facebook page. You might also be watching this later on YouTube as well. Very excited to be continuing on with our online programs here at the museum. As you are all coming online, I see you have about 20 of you already here within the first 30 seconds, which is awesome, and that number is growing. You can assist us by liking and sharing this video. So if you are enjoying these programs that the museum has been doing over these last 11 months. It's hard to believe that the pandemic has been going on that long, and we've been doing these online virtual conversations and videos since then. Thank you so much, all of you out there, for all of your support over the last year. We have seen tremendous growth in our membership roles and those supporting us here on social media, on our website as well. So a big thank you to all of you out there for all of your support. We're really excited about today's conversation. We have Dr. Kelly D. Mezurek is joining us today. We're going to be talking about specifically condolence letters that were written to the on behalf of United States colored troops who died during the course of the Civil War. It's going to be a really exciting conversation. I'm really been looking forward to this. This one's been quite a few months in the works, and very excited for this conversation. Before we get to that, those of you who have watched our videos in the past know kind of our introduction here. If you do support these videos, you like these videos, you can help us out in a variety of different ways. You can like the video, already mentioned that. Hit that like button. That shows others that you are interested in this program. You can share. That allows more people from your networks out there, wherever you may be watching from, to join into the conversation as well. And if you don't yet follow us or subscribe to the National Museum of Civil War Medicine here on social media, whether that's on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or over on YouTube, you can go ahead and like us, subscribe, follow us. That will give you more content like this. You get to learn more about Civil War medical history. Our museum is located in Frederick, Maryland. We talk about all elements of Civil War medical history, but we'd like to expand outside of just the 4 years of the Civil War and talk about how medicine got to the point where it was in 1861, and ultimately how the Civil War really plays a role in shaping and reshaping American medicine in the years that followed. And we talk about all different sorts of topics related to that as well. You can also really support us by becoming a member of the museum. We are a nonprofit organization, and members like you support programs like this. So I'm actually working with some new tech today. I have a new microphone that I am using here. So members like you support us improving our programs and being able to continue to do these sorts of virtual programs, which we intend to do and continue to improve on in the months and years to come. So even when we get back to operating as we were before the pandemic and visitors freely coming and going from the museums, we will be doing these virtual conversations and programs. So this is going to be a forever part of what we do at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. And you out there can support those programs by becoming a member. You'll see shortly a link in our profile where you can do that. All right, so let's get to our program today. I am going to be speaking with Kelly Mezurek, who is the author of For Their Own Cause, the 27th United States Colored Troops. She has researched African-American Civil War soldiers and sailors for over 20 years. In addition, she has published essays on Black soldiers who served as guards in Union prisons and African-American veterans in Midwestern soldiers' homes. And she shares her findings on the Black Men in Lincoln Blue on Twitter, Facebook, and her website, kellydmezurek.com. Mezurek is a professor of history at Walsh University. So let's welcome her on. Kelly, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Jake. I've been looking forward to this as well.
Yes, very, very excited for today's program. Really looking forward to having you on. Kelly has spoke for the museum in the past, spoke at one of our medical conferences a few years back, I believe when we were in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, speaking about the 27th USCT. And so it's really great to have you back here, and specifically talking about these condolence letters for USCT soldiers. But before we get to that, I do have a kind of a question. I always like to start off with the guests that I get to work with for the museum. It's with a kind of background information. You know, how did you become interested in the experience of African American soldiers and sailors, and specifically the USCT soldiers?
Well, it's a bit of a funny story. Back when I was working on my PhD, after comps, I was researching for my dissertation, and I spent almost a year looking at the Confederate War Department, particularly the Secretaries of War and their relationship with Davis. And I thought it was going to just be interesting, and I was not very interested. I was kind of bored. So I don't know why I thought I was going to be interested in it, but along the way, my advisor, Leonie Hudson, who just retired from Penn State University, asked me to work on a bibliography for him on the USCT. He was completing an article that he was working on. And so in the process of looking at the most recent scholarship, I saw the works on the 5th USCT, which originally was the 127th Ohio. And I was aware of it, I knew of it, but then I saw something about the 27th, which I had never heard of before. I was born and raised in Ohio. I've lived here my whole life. And that really got me thinking, why is only one regiment, and there were really only two regiments, entire regiments raised from the state of Ohio. And it really got me wondering why was only one regiment being looked at. And I spent a couple weeks digging around, seeing if there was enough information to do a dissertation, and there's more than enough. My advisor was happy that I was actually writing. So after that, I just spent years spreading, going deeper, not just into the 27th in Ohio, but also throughout the North and Midwest, and now even looking at the South and the Navy. And it is so much more interesting, and I think, of course, that's important for those of us that do research. We should want to do our research, but there's just so much yet to do. There's so much left for us to uncover about the experiences of Black sailors and soldiers and their families.
Yeah, I've been really heartened recently. With February being Black History Month, we've made a focus of sharing these stories much more than we kind of do during the rest of the year. And this is actually something we've been trying to change for the museum, is to build these stories, these vitally important stories, into our interpretation of what we do online, digitally, which of course is important these days, but also to integrate that into changes we are making in the museum itself, in the infrastructure itself. And I'm really heartened, I thought you would enjoy this, Kelly, by some comments recently that we've received on some of our Facebook posts, Instagram posts, and on Reddit as well, as we've been sharing some of these stories, especially of the USCT soldiers, that folks are really picking up on the fact that this is a story that has been criminally undertold in kind of earlier Civil War historiography. And we're starting to right that wrong, but people are really eager for these stories. And it really does, when we start to share them more frequently, it seems like people are really like, it changes the understanding of what the Civil War was about, and ultimately, the soldiers themselves who fought it, what they experienced. That it is not a white person's war, that we, on the other side, also see in comments on Facebook, that there is these very important stories that need to be told. Yeah,
and I'd like to kind of just push a little on that. I think we've been telling them for quite a while, back immediately after the war ended. We had Black men and some white officers who made sure to record and to share. But you're absolutely correct that it hasn't been integrated in a way. It isn't just an additional chapter. Mm-hmm. And it's wonderful to hear that that's something that the museum is thinking about strategically, as making it part of and not this addition. But we do have much more work being done right now. And I remember the movie Glory, of course, is often why people say they're interested. And it did have a large impact on my decision to continue to look at. This is my lifetime of research. You would think after that movie that we might have seen more people saying, well, why don't I know about this? And I don't know if it has to do with social media. It's more accessible, of course, than it was Glory now. 89? What year? Sorry, come out 89?
Yeah, 1989.
Yeah, so I don't know if that's it, but I'm just happy that it's happening.
That's actually a good pivot point for us here, because with the movie Glory, famously at the end of that film, spoiler alert, if you haven't already watched Glory, it's not really a spoiler, because come on, 1989. But that film ends with the assault on Battery Wagner outside Charleston, South Carolina. And we get a little bit at the end of the film about kind of the aftermath, the casualty lists. How many soldiers died in that fight, and how the 54th very bravely have fought in that engagement and began to change, their participation in other Black units, beginning to change the what had previously been pretty hardened hearts about African-American soldiers across the North, and showing that these men could really fight. But this gets to our conversation today, the aftermath, when all of these soldiers who are serving, many of them do not survive their service. White and Black, many of these soldiers, a significant percentage of them are going to become casualties, whether to disease or weapons of war. And this gets to the mourning practices of Americans in this time period, and how the Civil War becomes kind of a pivot point in the ways that Americans view death, and the ways that Americans, in fact, die. And this is going to lead to vast changes. We talk about this a lot at the museum because our location was an embalming station during the Civil War after Antietam. But the Civil War, because of its nature, changes everything in the ways that Americans die. And Kelly and I were talking before we came online about, the good death, this 19th century view of the way you're supposed to die. And how that had been kind of fixed before the Civil War, and how the Civil War is going to change that. And we're going to talk some more about that with some of these letters. But when we were talking about what we wanted to do for this program, Kelly and I were kind of casting around some ideas, and Kelly immediately jumped on these condolence letters. So if you could just kind of, Kelly, give kind of an overview of why you find these letters so interesting, and where did you get these letters, those sorts of things.
Okay, so first let's just put some numbers to some of your comments about those Black soldiers and sailors that died. Almost 200,000 Black men served in either the Union Army or Navy, and we have about 38,000 of those who give their life during the war. Of course, numbers go up immediately after those that return home and die from their injuries or illness. But if we're talking about during the war, that's a significant number of men that give their life. Many of them, it's for a very important cause, right? Whether it be the end of slavery, but in these letters we see also comments about serving their nation. And so the condolence letters, in the way they're constructed, open up for us ways of understanding why some of these Black soldiers and sailors fought, why their officers or leaders in other organizations or members of other organizations, like the United States Christian Commission or the United States Sanitary Commission, what did they think? Why did they think that these men fought? And so these letters open up more than just notifications of death. Another thing about the letters is they challenge some ideas that are repeated even today about whether African Americans either participated in some of the ideology of the Good Death, but did mid-19th century white Americans believe that they did or should. The ideas of how a man suffers honorably, how you have masculine suffering as a way of proving honor and bravery and manhood. This today is still shared as something that white Americans did not apply to Black soldiers and sailors. And the letters suggest that that's not quite true, at least for many of the letter writers. And so the letters offer us the opportunity to delve into some ideas that we hold today, as well as ideas that maybe we haven't talked about for the African American community during the war. And so hopefully we can, get into that in a little more detail here in a moment. Where are these letters? These letters come from a variety of places. Sometimes they're in the service records from the soldiers. And this would be because somebody has contacted an officer in a regiment or a commander of a ship and wanting to find out why they hadn't heard from their husband or brother or son. And so you'll see some correspondence that's left within those official service records. Oftentimes they're in pension records because the way, particularly for Black families, to prove that their loved one died during the war would be to have that documentation, especially the official documentation. The War Department required that there be an inventory for soldiers at death, and this is filed with the War Department, Adjutant General's Office, and also to share any of the effects with a family member. And so then through sharing, I have your husband's clothing, I have your husband's personal effects, you are announcing death, right? So this idea there's no official policy for that just also is something that we need to open up how we make that claim. So sometimes they're in pension files that show that, right? Here's evidence that my loved one died before. Very few are found in archives or historical societies. And of course, that's because for a very long time, our institutions did not collect papers of African Americans. And so we have to use these official government bodies to find most of this kind of correspondence.
So with all of that, I think that's a great overview. Let's dive into some of these specifics. We have some examples here. I'm going to attempt to screen share them for you all.
Can we start with the sanitary bulletin by chance?
Yes, we can. Let me pull that up right now.
Because we want to make sure and talk about this before we get too far, right?
Yep. All right, Sanitary Commission Bulletin. There you go.
So, and we can talk about examples of letters sent from people who worked for the Sanitary Commission. But I think something to make very clear before we get too far along is that these ideas of racism, the inferior treatment, inferior supplies are ever present. And I don't want at any point in discussing these letters for that to be lost. It's not clear in these letters. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And so here is just an example of one report. And there are many of these. Again, you can, the Sanitary Commission bulletins are all scanned and online for free, so you can have a great time reading thousands of pages of these. And in this particular example, you can see a report in which they're talking about working at one of the hospitals for African American soldiers as being peculiar, that the men are childish and simple-minded or simple-hearted. It goes on to talk about how they do not have enough equipment equipment, they don't have enough blankets, they don't have enough bowls. And so that idea that medical care for these Black troops is inferior in many places, we just really want to make sure that that doesn't get lost in our conversation today. So I think this is a good example of
that. All right. A great point. Sorry about that. Just making, there we go. I'm still getting used to the whole screen sharing photos bit, so bear with me, even though we're a year into all of this. So I have a kind of some general questions here, and we'll also be able to look into the comments section. I saw we did have some comments that we'll get to as we get towards the end of the program. But kind of as we're looking at these letters, who by and large was writing these letters?
Okay, so there are three groups that I can generalize for you. So let's start, because we already introduced the United States Sanitary Commission and United States Christian Commission, and men who are working as volunteers or hired by these organizations often are in the hospitals, and so they are helping soldiers who are convalescing. They are helping take care of the spiritual needs of the sick and wounded soldiers and sailors. And so they're on a daily basis interacting with these soldiers. And they write a good number of these letters to families. And what makes them different than the other letters that are being sent, and this isn't all the time, but I mean overall, is the focus on the spiritual journey. Were the soldiers ready to die? You know, what was their frame of mind? What were their last words in relation to their family knowing that they were ready to die? And this is fairly common in the letters from these two men from these two organizations. And so they may have been writing letters for these soldiers before they got to the point of being on their deathbed. So they might already have been writing to this family. And this is again, something you can see in the Sanitary Commission Bulletin is discussions from these individuals who are talking about the soldiers want to learn to read and write, how much stationery they're providing to them in the hospital. And I am talking about Black soldiers. Of course, they're doing this in the hospitals where white soldiers and sailors are as well. But this is specifically talking about the desire for that correspondence to go back and forth between the families and the men. And so they may already have had that kind of relationship. In other cases, it might be the first time they meet the soldier that they write that letter. But their letters, that's what makes them stand out just a little bit. They'll talk about some of the other things that the other letter writers write, but there's almost always that religious component, right? And again, they wouldn't take the time to go into the detail that some of the letters do, the length of the letters. These men are busy. These men are taking care of hundreds of soldiers sometimes, or individuals who are ill or injured, or assisting with taking care of them. They don't have time to write 3- and 4-page letters to families if they don't believe that it's important for the families to hear this. So this idea that the good death may not have applied, or white Americans might not have believed that it applied in the same way. The letters from the U.S. Sanitary Commission and the United States Christian Commission certainly challenge that. So that's one group that writes a large number of these letters. Another group are the officers themselves. And as I indicated before, they have as part of their administrative duty. And if you could pull up, if it's possible, the Clark inventory. So the Army revised its regulations of 1861 to include the requirement that officers had to send not only notice of death to the federal government, but also an inventory of effects. There you go. The middle one's really good. If you go to 38. that calls it an inventory. You see George Clark 38?
This one here?
I don't know where your mouse just went, sorry.
Oh, inventory of the effects of George Clark.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, okay, you are showing it. I apologize. I see your other screen.
Yeah, no worries. We're still figuring this one out. So
that's okay. We're doing so. This is a great example of an officer's duty, and so in most cases, almost all cases, the commissioned officers were white in the United States Colored Troops, and we've read, you can read many accounts of white officers who fall behind in their correspondence. They do not have enough help from non-commissioned officers who are Black that could read and write. And so sometimes they fall behind in this correspondence. So it's unfortunate. We have opportunity maybe to have more of these. But it listed what possessions the soldiers had at death. It lists where they died and what they died of. And again, this is sent to the federal government. But another requirement, and this is in Article 95 of those revised rules for the officers, is that they make sure that the inventory of effects, that the effects themselves are given to a family member or a representative. And it shows, I think, at the very bottom of this. Sometimes they'll show who they actually are given to. In this case, it just is stating they'll be given to somebody. If they have no idea who to send them to, they will auction off the effects, and then that money is sent to Washington to be used with any pay that hasn't been given to the family. So these officers have this administrative duty. They have to fill out this inventory, and they have to find a way to get those effects to a family member. Now, sometimes this means somebody within the regiment that was a friend of or a family member. Other times, officers go through the effects of the soldiers and find letters from the family. So oftentimes, these letters, condolence letters that are announcing the death, comment that I'm replying to you because this is the letter that was in the soldier's possession. And so they share the death of the soldier. Almost all of the time, white officers also shared information about how to get that money from the government, the back pay that is due, back bounties that are due. Sometimes these white officers then also share what the United States the United States Sanitary Commission and United States Christian Commission writers did. They talked about how the soldier died. Sometimes they're very, again, detailed. Did they die in battle? Did they die from a disease? How did he die in the sense of, was he prepared? Who was he talking about? Sometimes the officers took great care in great detail to share this. Other times, white officers simply said, here are the effects, and did their administrative duty. But money was one of the issues that you see more than in the officers. I mean, that is their role, right? Is how do you get the back pay? Mm-hmm. So these letters are the ones that are often sent to the pension office, because having the word of a white officer declare that the soldier died during the war is pretty much a guarantee that the family will get the pension, whether it be the wife, mother, or other family member. So they're very important. Third group are Black soldiers who are either serving in the capacity of a hospital steward, or they're sick themselves, they've been injured themselves and are in the hospital, or they simply are in the same regiment or knew from back home somebody that joined. And so there's a significant number of Black soldiers who are writing letters to African American families about somebody that has died. And these are really a combination of the other two examples. Sometimes they talk about how the soldier died They almost always talk about money. How will you get your money? And oftentimes there's advice about, who not to trust. But they're also often social exchanges. And so they, along with announcing that a soldier or sailor has died, talk about other people in the regiment and how they're doing, ask about family members of their own, ask about community members that they know. So they're very communal kinds of documents. And sometimes these are very short, depending on the writing ability of the soldier writing it. But they often are the most heartfelt of the condolence letters. So those are the three major kind of areas that these letters come from.
So I want to apologize. We had some screen sharing issues. Hopefully got those fixed in future. Do we want to take a look now, Kelly, at some of these specific letters? I know that we're very excited about sharing some of these. Do we want to start with the Coulter letter?
Yes, this is the one that kind of gives us everything at once, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the best examples, and again, it's not representative in the sense that all letters cover all of these things. But in this case, John Farrow served in the 5th United States Colored Troops, and he is killed at Chapin's Farm. And a white man from Ohio writes this letter. I've yet to determine how he knew this family. I continue to work on many of these letters, but as you can see, he's informing this woman that her husband has died. Excuse me, intermittent fever. I have the wrong person. Apologies. It talks about dying of the fever. But then we see that he's describing the last moments of this man's life, right? He comes back into consciousness, and he tells this man that he really wants his friends to know. Tell them I died trusting in Christ. Right? His last moments were calm and peaceful. So here is that resignation, not only resignation, but looking forward to this death and wanting his friends and family to know. Because the whole concept of the good death is that it's witnessed by family and friends. And so this letter is going to serve as that kind of memento of that moment, right? I can't be there, but I have literally in my hands the words of that last moment. He then goes on and talks about how the body is treated.
Pull that up here in just a second.
Sure. And while you're doing that, though, this idea of dying peacefully, again, I mentioned this earlier on, this masculine self-control of not only being in battle, but how do you act when you're ill? How do you act when you're injured? How do you act when you know you're going to die? We have scholars today that still claim that this was only a social concept applied to white 19th century Americans. And again, this letter is written by a white man who may just believe that himself, but in other letters collectively, we see this also being shared between all the other groups that are writing these letters. So talks about how the body is then treated, right? That he's clean, that he's buried, that he has a headboard. And many of these letters include more discussion of this process of burial, being accompanied by soldiers, having a salute at the cemetery, describing where the soldier is buried. And again, this is very important for those concepts. Then we get into the money. And again, this is something that's so very important to the families. But I mentioned earlier about who not to go. He's warning this woman not to get cheated by agents, right? Go to somebody you trust to write for this money. He also says, when I get home, I'll answer anything else that I can. I can help you with whatever else there is. And so the family receives this letter, and not only do they have to hear the bad news of the death, but then they hear what would be perceived as the good news, that it was a good death, that their loved one was taken care of lovingly, and that they can ask questions about it. Now, that's not as common. For the soldiers, the Black soldiers that write the letters, again, that more communal nature, they already know the person. That is implied that they'll be able to talk about it when they get home. But in this case, this gentleman is offering it. So we get kind of almost everything in this letter.
Yeah, I'm particularly struck by that. It's always so nice for us historians, and I'll kind of lump myself in there as a public historian, to find these individual documents that kind of sum everything up really well. As we were talking about how you've gone through all of the USCT pension files on Fold 3 and how exhaustive that is and how it's like finding a needle in a haystack. And when you come across a document like this, it's just so powerful because it has all of these elements that you want to understand this time period and what these people are experiencing. And when someone does it so succinctly and so well, it's a real epiphany moment.
Yeah, and you're right. And early on, that's what I thought I was finding, kind of a needle in the haystack. And I'll go back even further. When I began researching the 27th, I remember over and over again historians commenting that you weren't going to find this kind of correspondence or personal correspondence, that it just didn't exist. Some claimed it wasn't ever written, and others said it's been lost. And it's just, you have to know where to look, or you need to be willing to spend the time. And we spend time on things that we believe are important. We take time to look for things that we believe are important. And so I think we need to do a better job, historians today, in looking more deeply, because it's there. That letter is not rare. Is it true that it includes more of the collective examples? Absolutely. But when you read hundreds of these and you see the same themes coming up, you know that it is not something that's being cherry picked or a rare example. So yeah, there are a lot of these. And imagine if there are families holding on to some of these that for whatever reason have not shared them yet. And I can only hope that that's the case. I believe that there probably are more out there, and maybe somebody listening knows about one, and it'd be great if you share.
How many of these kinds of letters, I think you may have alluded a little bit to this, how many of these kinds of letters have you collected so far?
So I have transcribed 60 of them so far, but I have over 100 that I have located. I don't want to say I discovered them or anything like that. They've always been there, right? But again, the idea that they've not been called to our attention or shown or shared made me believe they didn't exist at all. There's so many yet that we can look for. Thousands and thousands and thousands of pensions that have not been scanned and most likely will not be. I mean, I hope I'm wrong about that. They stopped scanning those widows' files some time ago. And that is one of the ways that it makes it possible. Now, again, when I started researching the 27th, nothing had been scanned. I'll tell you that I have the service records for the entire regiment because I had to buy them microfilm. Now they're all online and I can do them in my pajamas, right? But most of the pension files and most of the government records, we do have to go to the National Archives. And you're limited in a day to how many you can actually look at. And so who knows how many more are out there.
So we have a kind of a list, a group of them here. Are there any more, Kelly, that you want to specifically highlight that you think are pretty illustrative of elements of these condolence letters?
Well, let's, if you can see the, is it Lewis?
I will bring those up in just a second.
And in this case, Sergeant James Betts of the 27th is working at the hospital, and he is also in the same regiment as this soldier who dies. And so here's an example of a Black soldier writing home.
Sorry about that. Here we go.
And so, and of course, the date is what really, hurts, right? It's April 26, 1865. Ohioans know the war is over. They're waiting to hear when their men will come home. But instead, Rebecca Lewis receives this letter. So he says it's his duty. And I think this is something that officers write, but particularly Black soldiers write a great deal, that they believe that it is something that they have to do to connect their home communities and the families with the men that are in the war. And he talks again about how the man has passed away. And I think really important here, it says, I have your likeness, which I will send to you the first opportunity I get. And so here's a case where those possessions are being shared. Now, I don't know if one of the white officers asked him to take care of those or not. We don't have his actual list, his inventory to know if these were turned over on purpose, or did Sergeant Betts simply have it because they were in the hospital together and he didn't want it to get lost and he wanted to make sure that it got home to the family. And it's a shorter letter. Many of the letters sent by Black soldiers are shorter than those written by officers, or at least some of the officers by those in those organizations. But that's not always the case. And I don't think it's in this particular letter, but again, oftentimes Black soldiers and sailors use this as an opportunity to talk about other men in the regiment and to ask about their own family members, sometimes literally asking that the letter be shared around so that others could hear and learn about other men and the condition they are, if they're healthy, if they had been in battle. But I would say that more than concentrating on the idea of how they died or the process of dying, Black soldiers really concentrated on how these families could get the money that was due. And of course, this is because Black soldiers and sailors' families suffered greatly, whether they be in the North, the Midwest, or in the South. And we often talk about this in relation to those formerly enslaved people whose husbands or fathers have gone away. And they do face unbelievable cruelty and want while the men are away. But an example from Ohio is that even free Blacks who served, their families suffered. So Ohio had passed a law during the war about creating new taxes to support soldiers' families. And so you could have it at the county level, you could have it at the local level, and there was also one at the state level. And so people were taxed so that money could go to families who needed assistance while men were in one of the Ohio regiments. It did not apply to Black soldiers because they served in federal regiments. And so this left them very precarious situations. And so it's clear to us why they're talking about how do you get your money? How do you get their back pay? How do you get their bounty? And it often is the primary kind of focus.
Yeah. So as we head towards, we're at 45 minutes now. I do have some questions I want to get to from the comment section here. So as kind of a wrap up conclusion to this part of the program before we go over to the comments section and take a look there and interact and see what you all wrote. I do have kind of more so like the future of this research and where you so far think this is going. How do you think these, in what you've seen so far, these condolence letters are going to change how we view the experience of African-American soldiers in the Civil War, or are these confirming findings that others have already made, or is it too early to tell?
Well, I certainly hope it challenges. I know they've challenged my thought process along the way, and in a positive way. Again, I was early years of research, and I was researching and writing my dissertation in the early 2000s, and you just couldn't find anybody talking about any of these kinds of letters related to Black troops. What I read was they didn't exist. Any letter writing between Black soldiers and sailors and their families. And just to give a statistic that's often used, many people say about 70% of African American men who served in either the Army or Navy were illiterate, right? So there's going to cut down the number of potential letters or correspondence between families. And then others have used the number of 25% from northern and midwestern states signed their names when they muster in. So still, we're talking about a small percentage. So I think the first thing I'd like to add to this is that we really want to take that concept of literacy. We need to throw that out right now because it really limits where we look and what we believe is available. And so while I'm not in any way arguing that there were a large number of literate African Americans, they participated vigorously in letter writing during the American Civil War. And so this is something that is a major shift. There is some letter writing going on before, and there's some great collections of antebellum African Americans who are exchanging letters, but the rate, the number just increases. And I'm talking about all areas of the United States. Formerly enslaved people are also engaged in this. So whether somebody's helping them write or they're learning to write once they get into service. So that's really important, that we don't take these numbers of literacy and then move on. So these letters are part of a larger project. I'm working on a book of over 200 transcribed letters between Black soldiers and sailors and their families. And so this is just one section or chapter that will be included. And I think that there are multiple ways to see the importance of this. The interaction between Black families and soldiers and sailors. It's also, I think, been not given its full due. There is a great deal of information flowing back and forth, whether it be through other family members and friends. We know through some newspapers, of course. But there's a great deal of private exchanges. And that's one thing we're missing. So we have a significant number of published letters that Black soldiers and sailors wrote to newspapers. Edwin Redkey's collection is pivotal. But those people are writing to a different audience. And the Black sailors and soldiers deserve to have their experience from their point of view included in what we started talking about today. This idea that this has to be more of a part that's integrated in Civil War history. It can't just be an add-on, right? And we do a really good job of sharing those private letters of white soldiers and sailors and their families. We know about that vibrant exchange. And it changes the way we think about it, even if you're doing a regimental history and how that news gets reported back home in the newspapers. And then you read somebody's letters and you get this whole other point of view, right? So I think that these letters add to how we understand Black experience, Black contributions, the cost of African American experience during the war, what they contributed, what they lost. My ultimate goal is that people like yourself, whether you're using them in museums, scholars that are working on larger pieces, come back and then use these letters as the primary sources that fill in some of those areas that we've left out.
Yeah, I'm very, very excited about this project, your research. It's been amazing to chat with you over the last couple of months as we've been working on this, just to hear the exciting work that you're doing. As you mentioned, regimental history, just kind of in passing there, and having written about the 27th USCT, we do have a question from kind of earlier in the conversation from Jonathan Jenkins, who says he became interested in the 55th USCT. And he has a question, says, where could I find more about that regiment? And I know you may not necessarily know that, but where did you do a lot of your research? Where did you find information about the regiment that you were interested in?
Okay, so let me say you can find a lot more about them. And I'm going to back up here to my, it's okay, back up here to my bookshelf. And there's actually a published collection of letters from the 55th. Sorry, there's actually a published collection of letters from the 55th. Know if you know. Voices of the 55th.
Awesome.
Yeah, this is really wonderful. Most of these were also published, but there's a few private letters in there, but that's helpful. We just, new book, well, it's not new anymore, of course, but we have Thunder at the Gates, which is also includes information on the 55th. So if you want to pick up those, of course, that's a great place to start. Getting on Fold 3, and I'm not a paid sponsor or anything like that, but we can't get into the National Archives right now. So the second best opportunity is then to see their records. If you really are interested in particular soldiers, you're interested in a particular company, you can then see all of those records. They're scanned, usually really well done, so you can read them. So that's an area to get a kind of the daily experience, well, the monthly experience of where soldiers are when they're reporting in. Again, pension files, only a certain number have been uploaded, but you could then look at the widows' pensions from the 55th, and you could get some information there. Chronicling America is free. It's Library of Congress, and they have newspapers that are scanned, and there are several other for fee that you can use online sources, and you may be able to find some other references to the 55th in that sense. And then last, I'll give you the example is several of the officers from the 55th left accounts. Of course, it's coming from the white officer's perspective, but something you can do now when we can't travel, those are the easiest ways to get in. If you can go to the well, you know what? Let me take that back. I think the 55th records have been scanned on Fold 3. I know the 54th regimental records are there, so double check that. I had to go to DC and get out all of the books on the 27th, right? There are hundreds of pages of regimental records, but you have to go there to see them. But double check. Fold 3 might have the 55th. I know they have the 54th. That's a start, and you can always send me an email, and I can offer other suggestions.
So since Kelly, you went back to the awesome bookshelf. Love to see people's bookshelves. We do actually have a question about about what's behind you, which is from Bill Shepard, who asks, "What is Black Men in Blue behind you?"
So that is actually, isn't it beautiful? It's an actual poster for a talk that I gave in Loudonville, Ohio. I'm a speaker for the Ohio Humanities Bureau, and I speak on not only Ohio Black men who served during the Civil War, but I also have a talk on their lives as veterans in Ohio after the war. And this was one of the advertising posters, and they gave me one of them at the end, which made me very excited. I really like it. But you can't see, I don't know if I can do this. I also have Robert Pinn up here. Can you see up there?
Yep.
Robert Pinn was in the 5th. He's a Medal of Honor recipient. And one of my former students actually blew that up for a museum exhibit, and at the end of the exhibit, she gave it to me. So I was very excited about that too. But Black Men in Lincoln Blue is something I came up with actually before the poster, because I really would like to see the word Lincoln Blue. A soldier who was in camp in Missouri, in when he first mustered into service, he's in camp in Missouri, and he writes home and he tells his wife, "You wouldn't know me since I put on Lincoln blue."
Wow.
He's so proud of his service, and he wants his wife and his children to, if you could just see me. And that really stuck with me. And I thought that really encapsulated what I'm trying to do. I really want to share the story as much as possible from the point of view of the Black men who served and their families. Sometimes we have to go around that and hear what white officials say, but my goal is to share as much as possible from their point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And the information's out there. Again, we have to spend the time.
Right. Another question specifically addressed to comments you were making earlier about where these letters were originating from. This is from Dellen, who asked, Dr. Mezurek, in your research, have you come across letters of condolences written by African-American chaplains to families?
I have not, but that is a great question. And since we know who these men are and we know where they serve, that would be a better target for researching other than simply reading every single file. I mean, I've done that with several regiments where I've just narrowed in because I'm, hoping that because of an event or something that was that the regiment participated in, for example, that I then might find by going to just their regimental military records or something like that, and I've gone through an entire regiment. And so in that case, that is possible, and you give me a really great idea to be looking. But I just can't believe that they didn't send them. I mean, that would have been not only duty in the sense of their service to the church, but their duty as an African-American man within this experience where they're watching soldiers and sailors that are not receiving equal treatment, that are not receiving equal health care, to make sure that those families get that information. So yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, we did a post about African-American chaplains, and we actually have a bit about them in the museum. It's definitely an area that I think hasn't been touched on as much as it possibly could. And I think there might be some there with some things related to the chaplains.
Yeah, and I'm thinking there's a small volume on those chaplains, and I'll have to pull that out now and see. 99.9% sure they don't talk about it because I've been through every single one of my indexes of books to look for condolence letters, but that doesn't mean it's not in there. So this is like being in class. Like students ask the best questions, and then it makes you like think about something, and then you learn something new. And that's so wonderful about this.
Absolutely, yeah. We've gotten so many great questions and comments that have made us really rethink the way we think about these issues and have helped us to reframe, oh, we should really do a video on that, or we really should go and talk to this historian because they have a perspective on this that would really inform this conversation that we had here today. It's one of the great things about these virtual programs that we've noticed. I have another interesting question here from Carolyn. We're not going to be able to get to all of the questions and comments today because there is so many of them, which is great. We'll go into the comments after the video is over, and I'll try my best to answer and send links relevant to what we've discussed today. But this one's from Carolyn, and she asks, how would letters be sent to family members who still lived in Confederate states? Was there any notification to those families?
So letters are being sent to enslaved families and formerly enslaved families. Now, as far as tracking dates as to when there's Union occupation, I've not done that. And again, another good suggestion for how that fits with some of these families. I think it's the Spotwood Rice letter. Are you familiar with that? Where he writes that he's upset how his children are being treated. They're in Missouri.
Yes,
yeah.
I am familiar. It was featured in Letters of Note, I think.
Yeah, and a lot of people use that letter, and that's great because it's a very important letter. It's not representative of most letters, but so there's an example of somebody whose family is still being held, and yet they're getting the letter. And I think he warns her, don't go through a certain person because he'll just take whatever I send you. I have seen quite a few letters that are clearly being mediated between a white, either former or current enslaver, and for whatever reason, I think there are multiple reasons, that they would want to facilitate this exchange. But the idea that is it currently under Confederate control is really a good point to make, that it probably has to be under Union control. Rarely you'll get something where somebody said, you knew me before the war. I'm hoping that you'll share this letter with somebody that indicates that possibly they're still in maybe Confederate areas. But I think, and I don't want to assume anything, but my assumption all along has been that they're being exchanged once you actually are under Union control. And remember, African American soldiers, in large part, are not joining until 63, and really mid to late 63 before there's any significant numbers. We have a few examples in 62, but therefore we're talking about, that area becomes larger and larger as more Black men are entering service, and so there's more opportunities. Yeah, another great way to point out that we need to be very, very clear about some of when and how and where.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we are out of time, unfortunately. I do see that there are still some questions in the comments. I will do my best to answer those. And if I can't answer them, I'll throw them over to Kelly.
Send them to me. Yeah, send them to me.
We'll send them along to Kelly. I want to thank you so much, Kelly, for coming on today. This has been great.
Went too fast.
Yeah,
Went too fast.
Yeah, an hour goes too fast. But with this research, and as I mentioned before, you have spoken for us before on the 27th, which we can definitely revive and bring back as well. We have lots of grist for future conversations. So we'll hope to have you back on soon.
Thank you. I look forward to it. Thank you again, and everybody for coming. I really appreciate it. I can't see any of you, so I can't wait, but thank you.
All right, so thank you all again from Jake here to say thank you for watching with us today. If you did enjoy the conversation today, you can watch the full program if you missed parts of it. Lives here on Facebook. It will also be uploaded to YouTube later with the my screen share fails edited out. It'll be as if it never happened. And if you do enjoy these programs, the liking, the sharing, subscribing, following, that is a great way to help support us. If you'd also like to support the museum, you can also become a member. I just put up a link. It's also in the comments section. Become a member of the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. We are a nonprofit organization. You can help support programs like this. Allows us to continue sharing these kinds of conversations, these stories, make improvements to our tech, to make these programs better for you all, as well as to make future changes to the museum, infrastructure, allowing us to not only to continue doing what we are doing, but to move into the future as well. And we're very excited to get back to being able to do in-person programs again, to get Kelly and other historians to come to the museum and be able to safely do that for you all, and also live stream at the same time. So we're thinking about these kinds of things, and your support can help those kinds of programs. You also get great elements of becoming a member. You get free admission to the museum, which we do have appointments open for the National Museum of Civil War Medicine in Frederick, as well as the Clara Barton Missing Soldiers Office Museum here in Washington, which is where I'm broadcasting from today. We just opened the Missing Soldiers Office for appointments this week. So if you want to come and visit where Clara Barton worked during the Civil War and afterwards to find missing soldiers, perfect place to come and visit, and to do so in a safe manner as well. We have lots of protocols, COVID protocols in place to come and safely be able to experience this history. So we're really excited about that. Thank you again all so much for being here. We'll see you next week. We have another slate of programs next week. And this is Jake and Kelly signing off.
Can I plug you though?
What's that?
Are you going to be, I want to put a plug in for your conference. Will you be having them again, your yearly, because they're fabulous. And I'm just, anybody that can go, I highly recommend it. It was great.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that, Kelly. Yeah, so we did do a virtual conference this past November, Gettysburg focused. This year, in October, November, we haven't picked a date yet. We are going to be commemorating the 200th birthday of Clara Barton, which is in December, Christmas Day of 1821, she was born. So we are going to be doing a Clara Barton and Missing Soldiers Office focused program. So we're pulling that all together now. It will be in a virtual format using Zoom or some other form of meeting program. We will be doing it that way, but very excited about that. Thank you for giving that plug. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, that's great.
All right, everybody. Well, we hope you have a wonderful weekend. I know we had some people checking in from Texas and down south with the ice. Please be safe down there, and we'll see you all next week.